Good morning. My name is John Duffy. I'm on the Board of Trustees. Welcome to the North Shore Unitarian Church, where our mission is to empower people to live with greater depth, meaning, and purpose. One of the things I really like to come to church about is it's my 1 hour a week where all the hustle bustle gets put aside, and it's a time to reflect and think about the big things, big questions in life, such as courage. So I'm looking forward to today. In this community, we celebrate people from all walks of life, no matter how you make your living or how you experience the sacred, no matter who you are or who you love. We hope you will feel welcome here.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kerry Burke, Sunday Services team. I've put together a panel this morning, and these fine congregants are going to be talking about things that they've experienced that required courage in order to overcome or to deal with on an ongoing basis. I've put together a number of panels over the years, and I've never had trouble getting people to agree, except this one. And I don't want to talk about the people that I asked, and they said, no, thank you. And I was thinking last week, when I was going to be just doing this by myself, what is it about courage that people don't want to get up and talk about? I thought this would be a kind of a slam dunk. But it turns out that in order to exhibit courage, you have to have a circumstance that is kind of awful. And that's what people didn't want to talk about. And further, they didn't think they were very courageous if you just go through some horrific thing, muddling your way along. And I kind of thought about my own dark days, and I realized I felt pretty much the same. There was nothing courageous in what I did. I just muddled my way along. However, courage with a heart, cœur, at the center, doesn't have to be that sort of military bravery going into danger even though you could get hurt. It can also be just dealing with the obstacles in our lives, and that is what we're going to be hearing about. And that is what we are all surrounded by here in the pews, people who have gone through the sorts of things that we don't like to talk about, even remember sometimes, but we have all gone through. Our guide is going to be Leonard Cohen, the Prince of Darkness, for things that are broken, cracked, need fixing, things that shouldn't have been, and yet you got outdrawn and you had to go ahead and try and shoot back. Even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but alleluia. And really, we should have named this service that, because we're going to be hearing about him. Thank you for coming. Our ministers are back next week if you are new and you'd like to see what else we do around here. I'm very excited about today. The band, for the first time, playing, I think, better than ever, and our great panel going to be doing a great job.
Thanks. Listen, everybody, I do have difficulty with my vision, so I have to look. If I look down at the paper and look up, I'm going to lose my place and stumble, so I'm going to do mostly read. The topic today is courage. Standing up, sitting up before you today, spilling my guts, so to speak, takes a great deal of courage, probably more than I've had to exhibit for a while. The definition of courage from the Webster Dictionary is mental or moral strength, perseverance, and withstanding danger, fear, or difficulty. Here are some of what the thesaurus on my computer said: bravery, nerve, pluck, and valor. I don't believe you can measure courage. You certainly cannot compare anyone's experience. What can bring someone to his or her knees can and does vary from person to person. The degree of what it takes to become courageous will often depend on the events, the degree, or the details, or multitude, reading doesn't seem to help either, multitude of other factors. Certainly, there is no way to compare those of us up here today, nor should we. Why is anyone's courage more or less courageous than anyone else's? And who gets to decide that? I did not think that going into the depths of hell and back, dealing with my sexual abuse, was particularly courageous. It was mostly a matter of survival. Courage or survival was for me a variable thing. It swung like a pendulum. There were a variety of intensities, a variety of feelings, a conscious decision for each and every one and for each and every event. My thesaurus used words like bravery, nerve, daring, and guts. That kind of sums it up for me. There were many facets to my recovery as well. On a day without therapy, especially at the beginning, I faced memories old and new. I had feelings of anxiety and panic pretty much all day, every day. I suffered agoraphobia. I could not leave my house for anything. Basically, I was a mess. I did not want to face the insecurity, the fear, the horror, the devastation, or anything else for that matter. I did not want to feel the pain for which there are really no words to describe. On a day with therapy, all of the above was still true to a lesser or greater degree. The added attraction, this is a good line, too bad I had to pause in the middle. The added attraction is now I got to relieve it all in front of someone. It's bad enough when you're doing it curled up in a ball on your floor, but when you have to express it to someone else, goodness gracious. And I had to feel in front of someone, have someone witness my pain, my memories, my judgments of who I was, and then my shame. I don't know why shame was such a big deal. I hadn't yet understood that the abuse was not who I was, but something that happened to me. I was learning to put the responsibilities where they belonged. The whole process took on and off about 10 years. I started with a psychologist and moved on to a psychiatrist who was also a psychologist. I was really lucky. After high school, I was a very angry person. I went to a counselor in my early 20s to try and understand why I was so angry. I missed a whole piece. Anyway, that began to reveal itself once I was in therapy for the sexual abuse by my father in my 30s. At the time, or during that whole period of time, I educated myself about family systems, codependence, dysfunctional families, and a variety of other related subjects. It didn't hurt that I worked at a self-help personal growth bookstore, the Serenity Shop, where I could find books to read to my heart's content. This is where I first met Yasha, actually. That was 20-odd or more years ago. And we discussed all manner of things, including our spiritual beliefs. I didn't yet know that it had a name called Unitarianism, but we'll talk about that later. This place, the Serenity Shop, was a blessing for me to test the waters of my recovery, to learn how to be around people and not shrink. I learned how to put all the lessons that I had learned in therapy into real-world use. I learned how to move from recovery mode to living mode and all that entails. Near the end of this time, I went for all kinds of testing to try and explain all the fun, in quotes, symptoms I had been having. This took over 2 years. I went to have my eyes checked, and the doctor sent me to a neurologist who sent me for a brain scan. Then he told me the results were inconclusive, so I had to go for an MRI. I either had an operable brain tumor or MS. I had asked him to tell me the truth. Otherwise, that was a no-choice choice. Even though I told him I wanted to know, because after the abuse recovery, I said I could handle anything. This whole thing put me in full-fledged panic mode. I spent many a week waiting on pins and needles for the results to come in. I was fighting for courage in case, just in case. I wouldn't name it, but ever. When the doctor said I had MS, I was so relieved. I floated. Oh, fiddle. And I was still floating. I floated out. Oh, thanks.
Want me to hand them to you?
Okay, that's even better. Thank you very much. I floated out of his office. I only have MS, I said to my boyfriend. He broke up with me that night. I was feeling giddy for about 6 months while having new, strange, and weird symptoms. After all, I wasn't dying, so things can't be that bad. Well, that's what I operated on for 6 months, and then I found out. That's because I thought I had dealt with the worst that life had to offer, so this should be a breeze. My comeuppance came rudely and swiftly. While it was true that a lot of skills I had learned could help me deal with the symptoms and relapses, but more often than not, each relapse needed its own coping skill. They were not transferable. I realized one day that this would require daily courage on some level or another. I had to learn to deal with the loss of mobility, the effects of each relapse, and how to cope with them. My vision decline, my cognitive ability or lack thereof, depending on the day, unbelievable fatigue, and some other unpleasantness I won't mention. This was not at all like about dealing with the abuse and being restored to normal. This was about learning to accept and cope, with each decline. Relapsing remitting MS is like a stairway. You go along a hallway straight and suddenly you hit the down step. That's the relapse. And then you hit the bottom of the step and that becomes your new normal, and so on. There is no getting better. There is only management. I did have choices though. I learned that earlier and again with this. I remembered the first 6 months after diagnosis and how happy I was. So I made a plan. I decided not to read stories of other people's experience. I would approach events as a single thing, not something that would or could lead to something worse. I wanted to keep being happy. I liked it. What a concept. I know this relapsing remitting MS can change at any time to secondary or primary MS. That's what Annette Funicello had. It took courage for me not to dwell on what could happen or what kind of wheelchair I will need in the future. I have dealt with the practical stuff so that I can make my choices rather than the MS making them for me. I do know that there are many things that can sideswipe or derail me as they relate to MS, but so can living do these same things. Thank you. I don't have my head in the sand. I much prefer dealing with life with all its fortunes and misfortunes. I have really bad days. I have bad days. I hibernate in my room when I feel miserable for any reason. I have wonderful days too. I think I still have lowish self-esteem. I discovered that I was shy rather than angry. I love to laugh. I have learned that courage for me is a state of mind. It isn't a thing. The women in my women's group show me that every week. From them I have learned, I have shared, I have courage. Courage is no longer survival, it just is. Thank you for listening. Oh, wow. Thank you. Wow.
When I first got the invitation to speak this morning, I was presented with the theme, I have the courage to grow old. And I thought, hey, that's pretty good. It sounds like a choice. I think maybe, even with a pact with the devil and that weird alter ego and the weird painting in the closet, I might take that pact. I can think of all kinds of alternatives which I would prefer. But in fact, at the beginning, when we get started, it feels like it'll never be over. Doesn't it? I mean, when we get going, when we're young, the days go by and we can't wait until we get the driver's license, until we date, until we have our first sex, until we get a job and get money. There's all kinds of things that we want to get older in order to do. But somewhere along the line, that teeter-totter changes its direction, and we say, oh my God, there's gray hair. There's gray hair in the mirror. I can't stand it. And then there's the little paunch, and then there's the slower race, the more difficulty serving the tennis ball, all those things that creep up on you. So we have all kinds of alternatives, but the biggest one is to have the courage. To have the courage to look our aging as we teeter-totter tips, to look our aging straight in the eye and say, not for me. I think I started that, I came to that conclusion when I just had a terrible day of loss, because that's one of the features of growing older, is the terrible losses you start to feel, particularly if you do grow older, because not everybody grows as old as some of us, like me. I've lost an awful lot of great friends. I saw my rugby team photograph the other day, and I think 4 of us are still alive. I mean, that's a lot. That's nearly 15, 20 guys, and that's wipeout time. So one of the things that happens is, like this one period of time, I lost a guy in Australia who had worked with me on an exhibition, and I got a notice from his wife that he had died. We were very, very close. We got really close building that exhibition under real stressful times because we both had other jobs. Then I lost a fellow that I had worked with at Simon Fraser for years and years. I got the notice that he had dementia and was slipping away. And then I lost a very old friend who had been with me and shared experiences with me since grade 2. And that was a real blow. Taken all together, it's a stunner. So what do you do? What do you do when you see the gray hair? What do you do when you get those announcements that great friends have slipped away on you? Well, what I've done is, and that's all I can talk about, is I've tried to get started writing again. So I started in an area that I did have. I once when I was really quite young, I was a young teacher, and I started writing some stories about Eustace Prim and Miss Palpatali, the gorgeous primary teacher, and their pursuit of each other and relationships and so on. And then it got published as a book. And I got reviewed in the Globe and Mail as, it was a collection of individual stories about these people, as a very badly organized novel. So here, my one chance for fictional fame was shot down terribly. So I've started writing, and I've written stories, some of them about experiences I've had, and some of them about imaginary experiences. One of them I wrote about, I've just finished, was writing about going under the bridge. Not across the bridge, but under it, because we couldn't afford or didn't want to pay the 5 cents toll that you had to pay when it was first completed. So I wrote this story, and because it included quite a few adventures that were of a military kind, and I sent it off. But I sent it off, and my wife doesn't know this yet, I sent it off to the New Yorker. Now, the New Yorker is the single most desirable place to publish a story in the world. And my chances are likely in the range of 14 million to 1. But, you know, what the hell? I wrote the story, I think it's a good story, and I sent it off full of hope. And that's what you have to have. You have to be full of hope. Hope that the courage you expend will lead you to experiences and results that are new realm and very productive. I think it's really important to stay connected. Because the sources of courage are really what matters here. And in order to stay connected, it's really difficult, because one of the things that happens is, I notice, it's exacerbated by the fact that I'm hard of hearing as well. So, I find that people just talk over me now. They wouldn't have dared do that 10 years ago. But now people just start talking. If I'm talking, often people just start talking. Let's say at a table, in a conversation of a group of people. Sometimes I find that my ideas are not desired and thought about. So I have joined a men's club, a church men's club, and I find that really terrific. That's a wonderful thing. But what I've done, I also volunteered to become a part of I used to teach at Simon Fraser. So I volunteered to work on the Retirees Association. I edit their newsletter, and I launched a program last meeting for providing services to our members. Going and visiting them if they're ill and isolated, driving them to appointments they have to get, helping them with difficulties in, finances or whatever. So, and I volunteered to do that, and I wrote up the program. It was passed, and so we're going to do the experiment on the North Shore and see if we can get that started in a way that can be replicated in other areas. I think it's really important to keep taking the initiative in the thing that you are passionate about and the thing that you still have the energy to do. I think the third thing that's really critical is to be more spiritual. Because one of the things that I find, is that I have to become more spiritual in connecting with others, with the world, and with myself. And it is in that exploration within that is the most difficult and the most challenging. I find environments that are very encouraging. I'd love to be in an art gallery, a really good quality art gallery. That's incredibly stimulating to me, partly because I'm an artist myself. The other thing that I love to do is go into nature. Nature, I find, is incredibly fortifying. It is going into nature by a glade, by a river, with the wind whispering and whispering to me. And I hear the voice and I whisper back. It is incredibly important to be on a developmental program, never saying no, never saying I can't, never becoming passive. It is in that way that we become, I believe, more spiritual. I always try to relate these things to poem, and one of the lovely things that I came up with was William Butler Yeats in Sailing to Byzantium says, "An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless so clap its hands and sing, and louder sing." So let us, as we grow older, sing louder. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice.
Hello, it's me again. In 1969, in England, two couples met in a hospital where their sons were both dying. They found each other, and they found it was such a relief and such a comfort to talk to each other that they started a peer support group to help parents who had lost children, irrespective of the child's age or how the child had died, independent of any religion, any philosophical or any government body. The Compassionate Friends is a support group for parents who have lost children and has chapters now in many countries around the world. The North Shore chapter of Compassionate Friends found me shortly after my son Matt died. He was 23 and he died of a drug overdose. They carried me on their shoulders until I could walk. And they held on to me when I found my feet until I could walk on my own. And finally, I could add my shoulders as a support for new parents who have joined this club that no one wants to join. And I can tell you that since January, we have had 5 new families join us whose children have died from fentanyl. Well, what have I learned? I've learned that you can't go around grief, you can't go under it, you can't go over it, you can't ignore it. You have to go through it to find yourself again. Your new self after the death of someone you love. This new self you have sewn and patched and glued together. The ragged and sad edges, and the glorious, precious memories, and the present moment make up your present self. Another thing I know is that everybody grieves differently. And that there will be this sadness in your life, whether you lose a parent or a partner, or a life that you formerly had, or a child. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. There is no right or wrong way to live through this. But it does take time to recover one's own life, whatever shape that's going to take. What else have I learned? Grieving is painful. I'm sure every person in this room knows that. But it's even more painful if you have to do it alone. This is a time in your life when you feel very alone. But no one escapes death. Everyone grieves at some point in their lives. And this is important, everybody grieves differently. And I found, for me, it's not courage you need, because I don't have it, but you need loving, patient, compassionate, non-judgmental support. What does take courage is to be a friend to someone who's grieving, because it can be painful and difficult, and you're afraid to mention that death in case you make someone sad and cry. So many people are awkward around these intense emotions that are so often publicly displayed. I've cried in Safeway, I've cried in, I suppose there isn't a place I haven't had a good cry. But I can't tell you how important it is to stand close and be a friend, and don't be afraid to speak that person's name who's gone. There isn't a parent I've met, and I've met now many, many parents, who doesn't want to hear their child's name. They want to be asked about this person they loved so much and had in their lives. It's certainly fine with me. My Matt lived and laughed and did really silly things, and I still like to talk about that. I love to remember those things. So when you ask, our children are remembered forever for the lives they lived. But I say again, everybody does this differently. So I don't presume to know the answers for anybody but myself. I could never presume to say I was courageous. I'm a flaming coward. And you'd know that if you'd seen me run from a spider. But what I am is a survivor. You see, I belong to this club no one wants to join, and the membership fee is heart-shatteringly high. The loss of a child is unimaginable, and it should be. But no one is immune, and I know that there are a number of other people in this congregation who have shared this experience. Grief and loss are unavoidable, universal experiences. For me, I felt I had to show my children, my surviving children, how to live without their brother. Because if I could do it, they could do it. And I had to show them how to live without parents. When my parents died, we are all walking lessons, especially when those lessons are hard. For me, on this journey, I had to find special ways to remember and acknowledge my son. I have a special place in my room where I keep some of his things. On occasion, sometimes it's an anniversary of his birthday or his death day, I write him a letter, and then I drive halfway up Cyprus, where they have a lookout, and I burn the letter, and the ashes get taken up in the wind, and I figure the message is going around the world. I speak to him regularly, but I think lots of people do that. After Matt died, and we were spreading his ashes in a field of blue camas flowers in his favorite place in the world, I rubbed some of his ashes on the back of my hand so that he could become a part of me again. A few years later, Maurice and I went to India. We went to Varanasi, to the Ganges, and as the sun was setting, we took a little boat out onto the river. Above the Ghats, you could see the Ghats and fires burning, funeral pyres burning above the Ghats. I put a little flower in the water to remember Matt, and then I trailed my hand in the river. I wanted to leave his ashes there. I wanted to return him symbolically to the Mother River. As many of you will know, to have your ashes given back to the Mother River is a sacred thing. For some reason, this symbolic gesture was a small piece of closure for me. I can't explain to you why. It just was. It gave me peace. I certainly don't want to be defined by the death of my son, nor do I ever want to find myself not missing him, because I always will. And even though it flies in the face of my Unitarian atheism, I will hold on to this insane, inexplicable, unreasonable thought that I will see him again. I refuse to let go of that thought because it comforts me, and I hold on to that thought as a small straw in the wind of grief. Does this take courage? No. Living with sadness and grief takes a strong will to survive and compassionate support and friends. It takes process and time and experience, and maybe, for me, just a little hope. Hallelujah.